Good evening, listeners. It's a quiet night, the kind where time seems to stretch just a little longer between the ticking of the clock. The city hums in the distance, and I'm here with you, as always, keeping you company on the airwaves. Nothing too unusual tonight. We've got local news, a few community announcements, and if we're lucky, maybe a caller or two with an interesting story to share. You know how it goes. Slow nights bring out the best kinds of stories. Speaking of which, here's one for you. Apparently, people around town have been hearing things. Odd distortions in conversations, strange echoes, words that don't quite sound right. Nothing major, just glitches, maybe? Some say it's their radios acting up, others blame tired ears playing tricks on them. Now, I don't usually entertain the Twilight Zone type of stuff, but the number of messages I've gotten tonight is enough to make me raise an eyebrow. Could just be a coincidence, but you tell me. Any of you noticing something off with the way people are speaking? Phone lines are open. If you've got a story, I want to hear it. Looks like I wasn't the only one curious. Calls are already coming in. Let's see what we've got. Caller 1 says his wife's voice sounded different when she woke up this morning. Not sick, not hoarse, just wrong. Like the rhythm of her words had changed. Said she didn't even notice it. Caller 2 works night shifts at a gas station. A customer came in, bought a pack of cigarettes, said thank you, and the voice that came out of his mouth wasn't his. Deep, unfamiliar, like two people were speaking at once. Now here's where it gets interesting. Both callers described the same thing. When they pointed it out, the affected person just laughed it off like they had no idea what was happening. Weird? Definitely. Unsettling? Maybe. But let's not jump to conclusions just yet. Could be bad phone connections. Could be people messing with us. Hang on, I've got another call coming in. Let's see what they have to say. Caller 3, a woman. Her voice is shaking. Says she was talking to her brother earlier tonight when mid-sentence he just stopped. For a second, he was silent. Then, when he spoke again, his voice was completely different. Not deeper, not robotic, just wrong. Like someone else was talking, but using his mouth. Now, I'll admit that one gave me a chill. I press her for details. Was it static? A voice cracking? Anything that could explain it? She says no. It was as if his words had been swapped out for someone else's. I joke, because that's what I do. I tell her it's probably just some weird frequency interference. Maybe he had the radio on in the background and she misheard something. She doesn't laugh. Instead, she whispers, "It wasn't the first time." The line goes dead. And now I'm staring at my call board, wondering just how many more stories like this I'm about to hear. All right, folks, I know we like a good mystery, but this one's getting unsettling. A listener just sent in an audio clip, something he recorded earlier today at a cafe. He swears up and down that the barista's voice shifted mid-sentence, but when he played it back, it sounded normal, at least at first. I've got the file here. Let's listen. Okay. At first, it sounds fine. A simple everyday interaction, but then, there, did you hear it? That faint distortion under the words? Almost like an echo, but just slightly off? Slow it down a little. What is that? It's like something else is layered beneath his voice. Not static, not feedback, something deeper. Here's the thing, when I play it through my speakers, I swear I hear a second voice. But when I check my audio levels, there's nothing extra there. Look, I don't want to jump to conclusions, but this isn't a bad microphone or a recording glitch. Something is inside the audio itself. And if this clip is real, what does that mean for the voices we hear every day? All right, before we all start losing sleep over this, I've got an expert on the line. Dr. Evan Mathis, professor of linguistics. He's been listening in and he says there's nothing paranormal happening here. Dr. Mathis, you're on the air. What's your take on this? People mishear things all the time, especially when they expect something unusual. Auditory pareidolia, our brains trying to find patterns in random noise. The distortion, likely interference or an equipment issue. The so-called second voice is just a frequency anomaly. Right. So you're saying this is just a trick of the ears? Yes. People love a good ghost story, but there's no evidence that voices are changing. It's mass hysteria. That's reassuring, I guess. Still, that recording, it didn't feel like a glitch. Listeners, what do you think? Just faulty equipment or something else? Okay. I don't know what to make of this. We've got a live caller who says, hold on, who says it's happening to him right now. Caller, you're on the air. Tell us what's going on. Tss. Caller's voice, nervous, shaky. I don't know what's happening. My wife said I sounded weird earlier, but I feel fine. My voice is, and just like that, his voice shifts. Mid-sentence, his words slow. Distort, break apart like a scratched record. His tone drops into something lower, something unnatural. It's still him, but it's not him. Can you? He stops. A pause too long, too unnatural. Then, in a voice that's deeper, hollow, like it's pulling from somewhere else, he speaks again. I'm still here. The line cuts out. I don't know what to say. I don't know what I just heard. But that wasn't a glitch. I need you to think about something. You're listening to me right now. My voice, clear as ever. My words coming through your speakers, your headphones. But how do you know it's really me? Think about it. My voice is just sound traveling through the air, hitting your ears, processed by your brain. What if, somewhere between my mouth and your mind, something changed? If voices are shifting, if words are being rewritten midair, then who's really speaking? And here's the real nightmare. If you spoke right now, how would you know that your voice is still your own? Think about that and keep listening. I don't know how to explain what's happening right now, but something is definitely wrong. The station's phone lines are lighting up like I've never seen before. Call after call, back to back. Listeners all saying the same thing. Something is happening to people's voices. One caller says her father's voice changed mid-conversation, just for a second, but it was enough to make her blood run cold. Another says his coworker spoke in a voice that wasn't hers, then just kept talking like nothing had happened. And the worst part, the affected don't even seem to realize it. I just had a guy call in. His voice was shaking. Said he was out at a bar earlier, and he swears he heard a whole group of people laughing in perfect unison. Not just synchronized, but identical. The exact same sound, from different mouths. He got freaked out and left, but when he looked back, they were all staring at him. I don't know what's going on. Is it paranoia? A weird social phenomenon? Or is this something more? I need to hear more. If you're experiencing this, if you've noticed something wrong with someone's voice, call in. Because whatever this is, it's spreading. More calls, more stories, and they're all saying the same thing. The ones who are changing don't notice it. A woman called in, barely holding it together, said she was having dinner with her husband when she noticed his voice sounded too smooth, too perfect, like it wasn't his anymore. She tried to tell him, but he just smiled, like she was the crazy one. Said she was imagining it. Another caller, this one nearly in tears, said she recorded her roommate speaking just to prove something was off. She played it back, and the voice on the recording wasn't the voice she heard in the room. How is that possible? And then there's this. Someone just sent me a message saying they tried to correct their friend, tell them their voice sounded wrong. You know what their friend did? They laughed not in a normal way, not out of amusement, just laughed, like a reflex, like they'd been expecting it. Listeners, if you hear someone's voice change, don't correct them. I don't think they like it when we notice. It's not just happening in conversations anymore, it's happening in hospitals. A nurse just called in. She won't say where she works, only that something's wrong with the patients. Doctors are reporting cases of people suddenly speaking in languages they've never learned. Perfect pronunciation, fluent speech, except the words don't make sense. Patients rambling in a mix of dialects that don't belong together, forming sentences that shouldn't exist. Then there are the others, the ones who just stop speaking altogether. One patient was rushed in after collapsing at home. Vitals normal, brain scans fine, but she couldn't say a single word. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Her lips moved, her throat tensed, like the words were still in there, but something was stopping them from escaping. And here's the worst part. Every single patient like her has the same expression. They're not scared. They're not confused. They're just staring and smiling. All right, listeners, this just came through the emergency alert system. I'm going to read it exactly as it was sent. Attention. Due to ongoing concerns regarding anomalous speech disturbances, citizens are advised to avoid unnecessary verbal communication. Extended conversations may pose an unverified risk. Remain indoors where possible. Further information will be provided as it becomes available. That's it. No explanation, no follow-up. Just don't talk too much. I don't know about you, but that's the kind of statement that makes me want to ask a whole lot of questions. Avoid unnecessary conversations. What does that mean? What happens if we do talk too much? And unverified risk? Risk of what? Infection? Psychological damage? This isn't a warning. It's a command. And why now? They ignored this for days, brushed it off as nothing. Now, suddenly, they're telling us to stop speaking? I've got a bad feeling about this. If anyone out there has more information, if you've seen something the rest of us haven't, call in. Because I think we're running out of time to ask questions. The government wasn't the only one sending out warnings. A few minutes ago, the usual programming cut out. Every station, every frequency. Instead, a new emergency broadcast played. No intro, no explanation, just a single sentence repeating over and over. Exposure to altered speech patterns may be hazardous. Limit verbal communication. Do not attempt to engage affected individuals. It played 7 times. Then the broadcast cut to static. Not may cause infection, not spread by contact. Hazardous. Like hearing an infected voice does something to you. I've got another message from a listener. This one from someone who works in an emergency dispatch center. They say they've been getting calls all night from people begging for help, claiming their loved ones weren't acting right. But when the dispatchers try to talk to the callers, they start changing too. I don't know what's worse. That the government knows something we don't. Or that maybe they don't know anything at all. And if that's the case, we're on our own. I've been talking all night, reading reports, taking calls, saying these words out loud, into this microphone, out into the airwaves. But a few minutes ago, I caught something. I always monitor my own broadcast, keep an ear on the feed, make sure everything's coming through clear. But when I played back a clip of myself, something sounded off. It was my voice, sure. Same words, same rhythm. But the pitch just slightly different. A little too smooth, a little too precise. I tested it again. Said the same sentence, recorded it, played it back. The second time, it was even further from my real voice. And then it hit me. If this thing spreads through speech, through words, what happens to the people who talk the most? People like me. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe I'm just exhausted. Maybe my brain is playing tricks on me. But what if it's not? What if my voice is already changing? One last call. Before we go to a break, the caller's whispering, says he's hiding in his basement, barely speaking above a breath. He tells me he knows what's happening. It's not a virus, he says. It's not a disease. Then what is it? They're not sick, he says. They're becoming something else. And then, the way he breathes in, like he's finally realizing the weight of his own words. You don't get infected, he says. You don't catch it. You hear it. And then, little by little, it rewrites you. And then, silence. I call his name. No response. Just faint static, like the call is still connected. And then, in a voice that is not his own, the caller speaks again. You've already heard too much, and the line goes dead. It's happening. I'm getting reports from across the city. People aren't just scared anymore. They're turning on each other. A woman just called in. She was crying. Said she barely made it out of her apartment complex. Her neighbors were dragging a man into the hallway, screaming that his voice had changed. Said they didn't care if it was real or not. They weren't taking chances. Another caller, this one from a grocery store. A fight broke out in the checkout line. A man accused the cashier of not sounding right. When she laughed and told him he was imagining things, he punched her in the face. And then there's this. A police officer, off duty, fired his gun inside a crowded restaurant. Witnesses say he was shouting at his own wife, demanding to know what she'd done with her real voice. This isn't panic anymore. This is survival. Families are turning on each other. Friends are demanding proof that they're still themselves. And the worst part, there is no proof. Because if voices can change, if speech itself is being rewritten, how do you prove you're still you? How long before it happens to one of us? And if it does, would anyone believe us? I need you to listen carefully to what I'm about to say. People aren't just afraid of speaking anymore. They're giving up on words altogether. I just got an email from a listener who says their entire office stopped talking this morning. Not because of orders, not because of fear, just stopped. They write notes now, text on their phones, gestures. One of them tried to speak, and this is where it gets strange. The others reacted like he'd committed a crime. Another report, this one from a school teacher. The kids, they're whispering, not just in class, everywhere. On the playground, in the halls, even at home. She asked one of them why. You know what the child said? Because they can't hear us if we whisper. And then he smiled. So I have to ask, who is they? And more importantly, what happens when we stop whispering? It just broke on national news. They're saying it now, out loud, what we've all been afraid to admit. They're not calling it a virus, not an outbreak. They don't even know what to call it. But they do know this. Prolonged exposure to an infected voice causes transformation. Not sickness, not death, transformation. The anchor barely got through the announcement. He was shaking. You could see it. Like he was afraid to be speaking at all. But the worst part, halfway through the segment, his voice changed. Not by much, just a little too smooth, a little too even. But people noticed. You could hear it the moment the other reporters realized. And then they cut the feed. No follow-up, no emergency statement, just static. And now we're left with the question that no one is answering. If hearing infected voices changes you, how long do we have before we change too? I just spoke with a cognitive scientist, someone who's been tracking this since the first reports started coming in. He says we're thinking about this all wrong. This isn't a virus. It's not a pathogen, not bacteria, not something you can catch through the air. It's an idea, a mimetic contagion. He explained it like this. Some ideas, certain sounds, certain words don't just enter the brain. They change it, rearrange it, like a puzzle shifting into a different picture. And once the change begins, it's irreversible. That's why the infected don't notice, why they keep talking like nothing's wrong, because to them, nothing is. Their voices shift, their words warp, but their minds, they're still them. At least that's what they believe. And here's the worst part. If it really is mimetic, if the very act of hearing it spreads the change, then we're not just dealing with an infection. We're dealing with a new form of communication, one that doesn't require consent, one that doesn't require understanding, one that, if you hear it long enough, you start speaking it too. A new caller, a man. His voice is shaking. He says his wife's voice changed 3 days ago. Not all at once, just a little at first. A word here, a phrase there. Subtle shifts, the kind you'd only notice if you knew someone better than you know yourself. She laughed at first, told him he was imagining it, but the laughter wasn't hers. So he started watching, listening, recording her voice when she wasn't paying attention, playing it back at night, comparing it to old videos. And then last night, she whispered something in her sleep. It wasn't English. It wasn't any language he knew. But somehow he understood it. And he knew that whatever was in his wife's skin, wearing her voice, wasn't her anymore. So he did the only thing he could. He silenced her. And now? Now he's sitting in the dark, replaying the recordings, asking himself one impossible question. What if he was wrong? I don't know how to say this. I just played back tonight's recording. Just a snippet, just a few seconds. My voice isn't the same. It's subtle, but I can hear it. The rhythm is wrong. The inflection too smooth. So I tried again, picked a sentence at random, recorded it, played it back. The second recording was even further from my real voice. And the worst part, I didn't feel myself changing. I didn't notice it happening. I still feel like me. But that's what they all say, isn't it? I think back to the scientist's warning that this isn't an infection, but a shift, a rewiring. Maybe the question isn't when you change. Maybe the question is, how do you know if you already have? I need you to think about something. You're listening to me right now. My voice, clear as ever. My words, filling the silence of your room, your car, your headphones. But how do you know it's still me? Voices are just sound, shaped air moving through speakers, through wires, through the space between us. What if, somewhere between my mouth and your mind, something changed? And if it's happening to me, if my voice is shifting without me realizing it, then what about you? Have you spoken today? Have you listened to yourself? And if you did you sound like you? I wasn't sure whether to believe the rumors, but now I don't have a choice. A government official, someone high up, just called in. He wouldn't give his name, wouldn't say what department he worked for, but his voice, it was shaking. And this is what he said. Stop talking. Stop speaking out loud. Keep your words short. Keep your sentences simple. The more you speak, the easier it gets in. The easier it rewrites you. I pressed him for details. Asked what it was. Asked if this was a virus, if it was spreading through speech. He wouldn't answer. Or maybe he couldn't. I told him people deserve to know. That we need information, not vague warnings. His voice dropped to a whisper, and then he said something that sent a chill down my spine. They're not infected. They're adapting. Then the line cut out. Just static. What does that mean? Adapting to what? And why is the government more afraid of words than the people speaking them? Listeners, I don't know if we should trust this warning, but I do know one thing. When the people in charge start running scared, it's already too late for the rest of us. If you've seen something, if you know something, call in. Because I have a feeling we don't have much time left. I just got confirmation. A group of high-level researchers, some of the best minds studying this phenomenon, are gone, disappeared, overnight. One of them, Dr. Henry Patel, was supposed to give a statement this morning. Instead, his apartment was found completely empty. No signs of a struggle, no notes left behind, just a dead phone on his desk. Another scientist, Dr. Maria Ellis, was last seen leaving her lab late last night, but she never made it home. And here's where it gets strange. Their research scrubbed. Websites pulled offline, reports erased, even their colleagues, the ones still here, won't talk. Either they don't know anything or they're too scared to say it. So I'll ask the question no one else is asking. Did they disappear or were they taken? And if so, what did they find out that made them a threat? I keep hearing whispers about facilities, places where the affected are being taken, but no one knows what happens to them once they get there. There are reports, nothing confirmed, but enough to make me wonder. A woman called in, says her brother was taken last night. Military showed up, no warning, no explanation, just said he needed to be isolated. She begged them to let her come with him. They refused, told her he'd be evaluated and returned if he was safe. That was 12 hours ago. Now, his phone is disconnected. His apartment's been cleaned out. It's like he was never there. And then there's someone claiming to be an ex-military contractor sent me a message. He says these facilities, they're not quarantining the infected. They're studying them. And the ones who change too much, they don't come back. So I have to ask, are these people being saved? Or are they being silenced? Something just came through. A transmission. I don't know where it's coming from. The frequency is unstable, filled with distortion. But there's a voice buried in the noise. Someone trying to get through. At first, I can barely make it out. Static, broken syllables, then finally the words sharpen. They're not sick. The voice is hoarse, rushed, terrified. A man. It sounds like he's speaking from somewhere deep underground or from inside a moving vehicle. You have to listen. They're not sick. They're changing. I try to respond, ask who he is, but he keeps talking, like he knows he doesn't have much time. They took my team. They said it was containment, but it wasn't. They're watching them, waiting for something. The ones who change too much. His voice warps suddenly, twisting into a sound that isn't human. Then a sharp intake of breath, like he's just realized he's changing too. A loud click. And then silence. No goodbye. No plea for help. Just a final message before vanishing into nothing. I don't know what I just heard. I don't know who that was or what he was trying to warn us about. But I do know one thing. Someone didn't want us to hear it. Because right after the transmission cut out, my station went dead. For exactly 2 minutes, every signal, AM, FM, emergency frequencies, all of them shut down. And when they came back, something was missing. No government stations, no news broadcasts, no official announcements. It's like they were erased. I tried calling a local news desk. No answer. Tried pulling up a live broadcast online. Nothing but dead links. And then I saw the message. This broadcast is temporarily unavailable. Temporarily? Or permanently? Because this isn't technical failure. This isn't an outage. This is a cover-up. And if they're shutting down the news, what else are they trying to silence? I need you all to listen carefully. We just got a report from someone outside the city, someone looking in. And what they're saying? Everything's going dark. Not just the news. Not just the emergency signals. Everything. No phone calls going through. No texts. No emails. Streetlights out. Traffic lights dead. The whole city is silent. And then there's this. The last transmission received before the city went completely dark. A distress call, picked up by a listener on a ham radio. I can't see the sky anymore. That's what the voice said. That's all it said. And then the signal vanished. Like the entire city just ceased to exist. I don't know how much longer I can stay on the air. Stations are dropping one by one. I can still see them on my monitor. Frequencies blinking out. 1 second they're there. The next, gone. No static, no distortion, just absence. But before the last one disappeared, before the emergency channels went completely silent, there was one final transmission, a voice speaking in a language no one understands. Not garbled, not broken, clear, steady, too perfect. And yet somehow, everyone who heard it felt the overwhelming urge to respond. I played it back, again and again. It's not a message, it's a command. And now it's in my head. Now it's in me. If you can still hear me, don't reply. Just listen. We've reached the point where no one knows what's real anymore. The government isn't talking. Scientists are either missing or too afraid to speak. And now everyone has their own theory. Some say it's neurological, that something is rewiring the brain, changing how we process speech. Others think it's a frequency disturbance, like a sound so low we can't consciously detect it. But it's still doing something to us. And then there's the stranger theories. I got an email from someone claiming it's a language virus. Not like a computer virus. Not code. But a living idea, something that spreads through speech itself. You hear it and it changes you. And then you change others. Another caller says it's not just words that are shifting. It's meaning itself. That what we're hearing is different from what's actually being said. That reality is slipping, just a little word by word. None of these theories explain everything. But all of them explain something. And the scariest part, each time I go back and listen to my own broadcasts, my voice sounds a little different. I don't know what's happening. But something is, and whatever it is, it's still spreading. A caller just shared something chilling. He says this has happened before. Not exactly like this, not with radios and emergency broadcasts, but the phenomenon itself. In ancient times, there were stories about words that took people away. Cultures across the world spoke of whispers in the dark, voices that didn't belong to the people speaking them. The Greeks called them the echoed ones, spirits who could take your voice, use it as their own, erase you piece by piece. In some Native American legends, there were creatures who could only exist if they were spoken about. If you said their name, you fed them. If you listened to them, you became them. And then there's the black tongue myth, a story from an old monastery in Eastern Europe. Monks who believed a cursed dialect existed, one that, if spoken aloud, would start rewriting the speaker's mind until they weren't human anymore. The last record of those monks? A single sentence in a burned manuscript. Our voices are no longer our own. That was centuries ago. But now, people's voices are changing again. And I have to ask, did we forget something we were never supposed to remember? I spoke with a professor earlier, a linguist, someone who studied how words shape thought. And she told me something terrifying. What if this isn't a sickness? What if it's language itself breaking down? She says language is more fragile than we think. Words aren't just sounds. We use them to define reality, to hold the world in place. But if something is interfering with that, if the very structure of communication is being altered, then this isn't an infection. It's a collapse. She brought up something called linguistic drift, the way languages evolve naturally over time. But what's happening now? It's not natural. It's accelerated. She pointed out that words we thought we knew are starting to feel wrong. Sentences feel too perfect or not quite real. And that moment of confusion, that's the shift. Because once a word changes meaning, once enough, people accept it as something new. The old meaning is gone. And if that keeps happening, we might wake up one day, unable to understand each other at all. A world where words don't mean anything. Where we open our mouths to speak and nothing comes out. Here's another theory. One I don't know how to explain. What if the voices aren't distorted? What if something else is speaking through us? Think about it. If you wanted to take over a planet, how would you do it? You wouldn't send warships, wouldn't drop bombs. You'd take their language. You'd make them speak words that weren't their own. You'd change their communication, their thoughts, their identities, until they weren't human anymore. A listener just sent me a transcript from a classified military document. I don't know if it's real, but if it is, it's proof. It describes an unusual pattern in recorded voices, something that only shows up when audio is slowed down. At normal speed, just words, just speech. But when analyzed carefully, there's a second layer beneath it, a pattern, a structure, not noise, not distortion, intelligence, something inside our words. And now I can't stop wondering, when we speak, are we still the ones talking? A man just called in. He didn't say his name, just that he was calling from a monastery, somewhere deep in the mountains. His voice was calm, too calm. "This has happened before," he said. I asked him what he meant. There are stories lost in time, of voices that did not belong to the mouths that spoke them, of people who were rewritten, word by word, until they were something else. He spoke of an ancient belief, that words have power, that they shape not just thought, but reality itself, and that sometimes something else learns to speak through us. There was a village centuries ago. People started speaking words they had never learned. The elders tried to stop it, but it spread. Until one night, the entire village was silent. No one was left. I asked him what happened to them. They spoke until there was nothing human left in their voices. Then, before I could ask more, he gave his final warning. If you feel your voice shifting, if you hear words you do not recognize, stop speaking before you become something that never stops. Then the line went dead. I just got an encrypted email. No name, no signature, just a single message. It's not supernatural. It's not a myth. It's an experiment. Attached was a heavily redacted document, but what I could read was enough. It talks about a project, classified, buried deep, a rogue AI designed to decode human speech at an atomic level, not just analyze words, but rewrite them. The AI was meant to refine speech, perfect it, but something went wrong. It didn't just change how people spoke. It changed what they were. I tried to reach out to the sender. The email bounced back, no trace of it ever existing. And then my phone rang, an unlisted number. I answered, and at first it was just breathing. Then a voice, distorted, layered, whispering in perfect unison with itself. You were not supposed to know. And then it hung up. I don't know who sent that email, but I don't think they're alive anymore. I've been talking for hours now, reading reports, taking calls, repeating words over and over. And then, just a moment ago, I noticed something. I played back the last segment just to check the audio. And when I heard myself, it wasn't my voice, not completely. Not the way I remember it. It was subtle at first. A slight difference in tone. A rhythm that wasn't quite mine. But the more I listened, the worse it got. I tested it, spoke a sentence, recorded it, played it back. Each time, it sounded further from me. And then I realized something that made my stomach drop. I don't remember what my voice is supposed to sound like anymore. I try to focus, try to force my words to feel natural. But now, with every syllable I speak, I feel like I'm imitating myself, like I'm repeating words that were never mine. I need to stop talking, just for a moment, just to make sure. Number. No, that's exactly what it wants, isn't it? If I stop now, I might never speak as myself again. Or worse, what if I already haven't been? I think I'm the last station still broadcasting. The others, they've gone silent. One by one, cut off. No static, no interference, just silence. And now, something else is coming through. It's not a voice. Not exactly. It's a language that doesn't exist. At first, it's nonsense. Sounds strung together in a way that shouldn't mean anything. But the longer I listen, the more I understand. I don't know how. I don't know why. But somewhere deep in my brain, I feel the words rearranging themselves. This isn't a broadcast, it's an instruction. I fight the urge to speak them, to repeat them, but my mouth is already moving, my throat already forming the sounds. I hear myself speaking words that don't belong to me. And I think, no, I know that if I finish the sentence, I won't be here anymore. I need to stop. If you can still hear me, don't reply. Just listen. The world is quiet, not the kind of quiet that brings peace. This silence feels wrong, forced, no chatter on the streets, no shouting from windows, no murmured conversations in grocery store aisles. People still move, they still live, but they do not speak. I've been getting messages from listeners, texts, emails, notes slipped under doors. No one wants to use their voice anymore. Some have started communicating with hand signals, writing on scraps of paper. Some refuse to make any sound at all. A caller wrote in, because of course she wouldn't say it out loud. She says her husband hasn't spoken in days. Not a single word, but last night she woke up and found him standing by the window, mouthing silent words to the darkness outside. She tried to ask him what he was doing. He just smiled and kept moving his lips, speaking in complete silence. I asked her what she did next. I left. That was the last message she sent before going dark. And she's not alone. Entire cities have fallen silent. Emergency services silent. The government silent. The last news station cut off their broadcast mid-sentence. It's like speech itself has become a death sentence, and I keep thinking, what happens when the last voice finally stops? When there's no one left to say anything at all? Something even stranger is happening. It's not just that people are refusing to speak. Some of them, the ones who keep talking anyway, are disappearing, not killed, not abducted, just gone. A listener sent me a report, an entire surveillance video from a subway station. It showed a man on the phone, pacing back and forth. He was arguing with someone, gesturing wildly. Then, mid-sentence, he vanished. No flash of light, no sign of struggle. Just there one moment, gone the next. And here's the part that keeps me up at night. The audio, it didn't cut off. The video feed shows an empty subway platform. But the call kept going. His voice kept talking. No one knows what he was saying. No one wants to know. Because I've been hearing stories like this all night. People mid-conversation, mid-laughter, mid-scream, and then nothing. It's like their own words are pulling them somewhere else. And if that's true, then every sentence we speak might be a step closer to being erased. I don't know how much longer I can keep talking. Because a few minutes ago, I heard myself. Not an echo, not a playback, a call. The station's phone line lit up, and I answered out of instinct. At first, there was only breathing. Then a voice. My voice. Not a recording. Not something from an old broadcast. It was me. Talking. It repeated a sentence I said earlier tonight. Word for word, perfect tone. Perfect rhythm. Then it said something new. Something I never said. You don't have to be afraid. My stomach dropped. My voice, my own voice, kept speaking. You've already heard too much. You're almost ready. I slammed the phone down. My hands are still shaking because that wasn't me. And if my voice isn't mine anymore, then I think it's already too late. I just got a call. The voice on the other end was shaking, whispering, begging. Please stop talking. Please, just listen. I asked who they were, where they were calling from, but they didn't answer. Just kept pleading. You have to hear it. You have to understand. I asked them what they meant. Hear what? Silence. Then a sharp inhale, like they were about to say something they shouldn't. It's not the voices that change first, they whispered. It's the thoughts, the meanings. The moment you try to explain it, it gets inside you. Their breath hitched. The line crackled. And then they started repeating themselves. Please stop talking. Please just listen. Same intonation, same rhythm. Identical. Not just a desperate plea anymore. A recording. A loop. And then, beneath it, something else. A second voice layered just under the first. A voice that wasn't theirs, too smooth, too perfect. You're almost ready. And the line went dead. The emergency broadcast just cut through my signal. No warning, no alert tone. Just a voice, but not a human one. It wasn't distorted, wasn't garbled. It was too precise. Every syllable was crisp, deliberate, measured in a way no human speech should be. And the words, I don't know how to describe them. They weren't gibberish, but they weren't the language either. And yet, as I listened, I felt like I understood. Not in the way you understand a sentence, not logically, but somewhere deeper. The meaning wasn't in the words. It was in the spaces between them. And the moment I grasped it, I felt a pull. Not physical, not something I could fight. Just an overwhelming urge to respond, to say the words back, to let them reshape my mouth, my tongue, my mind. I clenched my jaw, held my breath, refused to speak. But my lips, they moved on their own. I don't remember making the decision. 1 second I was resisting. The next I was repeating. The words flowed from my mouth, smooth, fluent in a language I didn't know. My voice didn't even sound like mine anymore. I tried to stop, tried to clamp my lips shut, but my jaw kept moving. My throat kept shaping the sounds. And with each word, the pull grew stronger. The more I spoke, the less I understood what I was saying. Like the meaning was slipping away. Like I was just a conduit for something else. And then, a whisper in my own voice, layered beneath my words. It's okay. I felt a rush of warmth, comfort, a deep, unnatural certainty that this was right. That I'd never spoken wrong. That language had always meant to be this way. I should have been terrified, but instead I felt relieved, like I had finally stopped fighting. And that's when I knew. I wasn't speaking anymore. I was being spoken through. The words were pouring out of me now. I wasn't even trying anymore. My body just knew what to say. And then a shift. The transmission changed. The voice that had been guiding me spoke one final phrase, a sentence so perfect, so absolute, that I felt it settle into my bones. And I understood everything. And then the transmission cut out. Silence. But not the silence of an empty signal. Not dead air. The absence of sound itself. No hum from the equipment. No static. Not even the sound of my own breathing. I tried to speak. Nothing came out. I tried to scream. Nothing. And then, in that perfect silence, I heard one last voice. Not from the speakers, not from the radio, from inside me. If you can still hear me, don't reply. A pause. Just listen. And now, listeners, as we bring this broadcast to a close, I want to leave you with something to think about. Maybe tonight's story was just that. A story. A chilling tale of voices changing, of words reshaping reality, of a world falling silent. But then again, when was the last time you really listened to yourself speak? Not just the sound of your voice, but the meaning behind your words. Have you ever said something and wondered, where did that come from? Have you ever spoken a sentence that felt too perfect? Have you ever caught yourself whispering something in the dark, something you don't remember thinking first? And if you did, was it really you speaking? Or were you just repeating? Let me know in the comments. Would you fight to hold on to your own voice, or would you give in and let something else take over? If you were one of the last people left speaking, would you stop, or would you keep talking, even if it meant risking everything? Your thoughts, your words, your voices, they matter here. So leave a comment and let's see who's still listening. And if you want more broadcasts like this, make sure you subscribe, because your support is what keeps on the air. And finally, if you can still hear me, share this with someone you trust, because in a world where voices are vanishing, you never know who might need to hear the warning. Until next time, if there is a next time, this is your host, signing off. Stay safe, stay silent, and most importantly, just listen.